BBC Sounds. Music, radio, podcasts.
Hello, and thank you for listening to the Farming Today podcast with me, Stefan Messenger. In this episode, a stark warning over the future of the UK's peatlands.
Huge amounts of carbon are stored in existing peatlands. If we have any hope of preventing the loss of carbon from those peatlands, we do need to invest rapidly and heavily in trying to maintain them in as good a state as possible.
But first, our theme this week is land use. There are a lot of things we want from the land, of course. Food production, green energy, housing, space for nature. And often these things are seen as being in competition with one another. But Rebecca Rooney has been to visit one farm near Warminster in Wiltshire, where Josh Stratton says different types of land use can work hand in hand.
Buzz, come on. Good girl, come on then. So what we can see from this one point is lots of things that knit together in a jigsaw. So we've got about 1,000 acres of very open farmland in front of us. Now that's our factory floor. We're producing high quality arable crops, wheat, barley, oilseed rape and so on. And that is incredibly important. But what we're trying to do around that is also create an amazing environmental habitat. So we can see a beetle bank, we can see a winter bird food crop, we can see an unharvested cereal mix, creating this amazing environmental habitat all around the factory floor. We've got the second highest population of corn bunting in Wiltshire here, a very good population of barn owls. What you can also see is you can see our renewables projects.
Just behind the tree line over there, I can see a glimpse of a structure. And what's that?
So we have an anaerobic digester. So we're producing about 4 megawatts of electricity an hour from food waste, which comes up here. It's a number of lorries going backwards and forwards in front of us.
I can just get a little whiff because they're spreading the digestate on the land at the moment.
That's right. So we have about 75,000 tonnes a year of digestate coming out. That's a very nutritious, low-carbon source of fertiliser for our crops.
You've got other things going on in terms of renewables as well.
Yeah, so we've developed 3 solar fields totaling 100 acres. We've got another 50 acres ready to develop now. We're also utilising the spare heat and power from the anaerobic digester into a greenhouse that we built last year. So we're creating what I call a circular economy. So food waste leads to electricity, leads to heat, leads to more produce, plus the waste product going back on the land.
And, one of the big concerns about renewables is it takes up land that should be used for growing crops. Have you had to sacrifice food production for your renewables projects?
Yes, we have. So at the moment, 2% of our land area is used for solar, which will possibly go up to 3%. We think that's a good compromise. We've got about 7% of our land in environmental projects. So I think the balance is correct. But by farming better and farming more cleverly and investing in soil health, we are actually increasing our yields year on year. So that 12,000 tonnes of food we produce every year, that's not being sacrificed. What we're doing is we're farming better, but we are diversifying our land use into conservation, electricity production and other projects.
And you've even employed an ecologist.
Yes, we've got a full-time ecologist, Robin, on the farm. Robin's really turbocharged the environmental output of what we're doing.
I'm Robin Leach. I'm the farm ecologist. So this is a winter cover crop. It does a number of things, lots of stuff for soil quality. The main one that I'm interested in is the fact that it's good for water quality. Essentially, it reduces the runoff potential of any field.
What's your job in terms of looking at the land use of the farm here?
My job is to look at the nature that we have on site, work out what's important, what we have, how we can improve things, and then work with the local cluster group, which I facilitate, essentially link all the farms together, help everyone improve their farms for nature alongside continuing to farm and make food.
And is there a tension in terms of what you would prioritise parcels of land for, that your priorities are different to, say, the farmer's priorities?
There's always going to be a slight contention there, and it's sort of convincing those either farmers or landowners or whoever I'm working with at the time that actually this has a different kind of importance. Actually, there's not just a nature benefit to these parts of land. There's actually potentially a financial and commercial benefit as well.
We've been waiting for a land use framework for some time. What difference would that make for farmers?
In my opinion, I'm afraid it's nothing. What we do here is we do projects on their merits. But ultimately, we're all businessmen and we all have competing pressures on our business, whether it's the bank or family or government pressure or whatever it may be. We try and make a good decision on the day that will benefit the business long term. But there's nothing I'm doing here that any farmer can't do.
Josh Stratton in Wiltshire. Another use for land is, of course, planting trees, and again, that's something that can take land out of food production. But it can be done alongside it in what's known as agroforestry systems. Trees can be planted in livestock pasture, where they can provide shade and even supplementary food for stock, or in rows through arable fields, leaving room for machinery to move down in between them. A new tree species guide for UK agroforestry systems has been produced by Forest Research and the University of Reading to help farmers decide what to plant and where. Bob Hockenhull has been finding out more with Staffordshire dairy farmer James Macpherson, who has planted 2,000 trees on his land.
They're predominantly native broadleaf, sycamore, lime, silver birch, Scots pine, hazel.
What benefits have there been by you planting all these trees to the environment around the farm?
The one that would stand out first and foremost is that there's a brook course that we planted up back in 2018, which normally sits dry, but in times of very heavy rainfall, which we seem to get more and more of, you can definitely see it sort of slowing the water flow. The cumulative effect, if it was done in several places, would have a marked impact, I'm sure, on the water going downstream in a short space of time.
I know you've got lime trees on the farm as well, and they're beneficial for the cattle, aren't they?
They love standing underneath them. They've got a huge wide canopy. They'll stand underneath them on a real hot day, and it makes a big difference shade-wise to them. Yeah, they are a nice tree, and they work well with the cows.
Who's actually paying for all this tree planting? Do you pay yourself?
No, we're very fortunate. We're in the National Forest. Through the grant schemes, the various grant schemes, they funded the trees and the planting of those trees, and mostly the back fencing of them as well, to keep cattle off, to make it a viable option for us.
And tree planting is an option the government would like to see more farmers getting involved with. Kate Beecham from Forest Research has helped write a new guide in partnership with the University of Reading. The Tree Species Guide for UK Agroforestry Systems identifies 33 species which farmers might want to consider planting.
So we've produced this guide because trees can provide many benefits to farms and on agricultural land, as long as the right trees are selected for the right places and the plantings planned carefully to align with the farm system and the farm business. Trees can provide many benefits to farmers, including shade and shelter for livestock and for crop systems. They can provide supplementary feedstock and nutrients, and can increase the food production potential of a farm and diversify the income stream with products such as fruits and nuts and wood products or fuel. Trees can improve water quality and soil quality, as well as storing carbon to mitigate climate change. And they can increase the biodiversity on the farm by introducing habitat structures such as corridor networks between different habitats.
I'm guessing some trees just won't suit certain types of land.
Of course, yes, some species are sensitive to certain climate conditions, whether it's frost or heat. So understanding and using that knowledge that farmers have about their land and their sites, that can help them to select a species that's going to thrive in their specific locations. And there are some properties of trees that aren't suited to different systems, such as fast-growing trees that might not be suited to a silver arable system, or if the root or canopy structure is too wide or invasive, that's not going to be suitable for certain locations.
Back on James Macpherson's farm near Burton-on-Trent, I asked him whether he thinks many farmers will take up the idea of planting more trees on their land.
They will do. It'll always be a hard sell to a farmer that's got good quality open land to plant trees all over it without a guarantee of a financial reward. Going forward, they're not going to be able to grow crops on it or plant certain things. It'll probably come down to the financial impact. There'll be very few people that would do it just for the philanthropic element.
James Macpherson in Staffordshire. The majority of the UK's peatlands could be at risk of drying out in the next 40 to 50 years because of climate change, according to a new study from scientists at the Universities of Exeter, Manchester and Derby. Healthy, wet peatlands are seen as part of the solution to climate change because they soak up planet-heating carbon dioxide. UK peatlands currently store an estimated 3.2 billion tonnes of carbon. But where they dry out, they become a problem because they can release that stored carbon back into the atmosphere. The project's lead researcher, Professor Dan Beber, says that as our weather gets warmer and drier, it's less suitable for peat.
The research that we've just published essentially looks at the climate which is suitable for peat, so what we call the bioclimatic envelope. And what we find is that all of the peatland that we see in the UK exists under very wet and quite cool conditions. When we project forward into the future, we find that pretty much all of the peatland, apart from the western half of Scotland, moves outside of that envelope and into conditions where we just don't find peat. And that leads us to think that pretty much all of the peatland we have is going to become at risk of drying out and essentially losing the carbon that's stored there.
And what are the implications? What are the consequences, Dan, if vast swathes of the UK's existing peatlands dry up, as you say?
Well, historically, peatlands have been a carbon sink, which means that they take CO2 out of the atmosphere and store it as undecayed vegetation. If we reach a point where they are drying out and warming up, they will become a carbon source, and a very big one. So that's something we have to avoid if possible.
But there's quite a difficult message in there, isn't there, about where we might have to target efforts and funding in future. Are you suggesting that, we should sort of give up on certain areas and focus on the northern half of the country?
Well, it is a very difficult question to answer. I think our models are perhaps one part of the puzzle. What needs to happen next is the development of a more dynamic understanding of what conditions actually cause peat to lose carbon, either through erosion or through essentially the decay of the organic matter that's stored there. We can certainly say that if we take restorative action and try and maintain peatlands in a very wet condition, that will help protect them against those changes that we might see in future.
How worried should we be by the findings of this study?
I'm very worried about the findings of the study. It shows that peatlands are pretty much set to move outside of their bioclimatic envelopes in just a few decades. It's a carbon asset that we really can't afford to lose. Huge amounts of carbon are stored in existing peatlands, and if we have any hope of preventing the loss of carbon from those peatlands, we do need to invest rapidly and heavily in trying to maintain them in as good a state as possible.
Professor Dan Beber from the University of Exeter. That's all from us this morning. I'm Stefan Messenger. The producer is Heather Simons, and Farming Today is a BBC Audio Bristol production.